I came home from work just before midnight, and the apartment was empty, which meant she probably wouldn't be home at all that night. I always caught myself wondering where she was, even knowing that whatever conclusions I might come to would only upset me. I stripped off my blue polo and khakis and settled into bed, stretching over both sides of the mattress. This was one perk. I rarely had to share our king-size bed anymore. 2 more months until the lease ended and I could find a new place to live. I had big plans for April. I daydreamed of a 1-bedroom, bachelor-pad apartment and the complete control and seclusion of having a place all to myself. I had ideas about applying for promotions, maybe moving states, dating beautiful girls. Some real jump right into the pool philosophy. An exhaustingly long stretch of work days made for a very bland schedule. I'd wake up late in the morning with only a few hours to spare before clocking in. And after work, I'd stay up late, chatting with distant friends on the internet, drinking, listening to the same 20 songs over and over and over. Stacked up, it all got pretty routine pretty quick. One vice that I embraced shamelessly after the breakup was getting high. I loved it. I stayed strapped with weed as long as my bank account allowed it. As much as my bank account allowed, in fact. Come home, turn on the Chromecast, smoke a ball on the balcony, and sign into Facebook and Skype. That was the itinerary most nights. Between having my ass handed to me on a regular basis at the job, and the stupefying haze I put myself in every night, some responsibilities flew under the radar. Laundry piled up, dishes piled up, trash piled up. February had brought an incredible cold that made me freeze all the way down to my gooch. You know, that little stretch between the ass and the sack? Instead of taking out the trash immediately, one of us would just tie off the bag and leave it on the kitchen floor. Minimize trips by stockpiling a bit. Since she wasn't home anymore, it left most of the basic chores in my admittedly incompetent hands. But one night, after freezing my ass off on the balcony, braving the harsh winter chill long enough to suck down a bowl of weed, I decided that I needed to accomplish something tonight so that it wasn't just another write-off. I went and changed into warmer pants and bundled up with a scarf and heavy jacket, then grabbed my phone and earbuds. Standing in the kitchen, I opened the YouTube app and searched for ASMR videos. For those of you not familiar with the acronym, ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. That sounds like a big scary term, but it's actually for something pretty simple. You know when you're sitting in a quiet room and some mysterious sensation happens inside you. Like all the hairs on your neck are prickled up and your scalp has this weird but pleasant tingle all around. It can be triggered by a number of things. Softly spoken whispers, gentle, repetitive scratching. Hell, it can even happen if you just imagine someone focusing on some dull or mundane task. I'm sure most of you have felt it at some point in your life, even if you weren't sure what it was. Well, These videos were intended to trigger that tingling sensation. I started up some video where some guy was tapping together little wooden blocks. I made sure my earbuds were in tight and started wrangling the bundles of trash. Counting the one from the trash can, I had 5 to take out to the dumpster. I grabbed fistfuls of trash bag handles and began my careful trudge down the stairs. I could see my breath as soon as I stepped out of the hallway and out onto the sidewalk. I headed for the dumpster at the end of the dark parking lot, listening as 2 hands began to rub wooden blocks together in my ear. I had to lift the black lid off the dumpster to toss in my bags. The big flap teetered over its hinges and then flopped against the back of the dumpster. I tossed in the first 2, then did my best attempt at a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar skyhook with the other 3. The motion sent my phone flying from my pocket. As the buds were ripped from my ears, I heard the phone bounce off the asphalt with an unpromising shatter. I cursed and picked it up, thumbing at the power button frantically. The home screen lit up. Cracks splintered out in every direction from the top left corner, like a spider web spun out on the screen. Damn it, I cursed. My frosted breath hissed off my lips. I plugged my earbuds back in and attempted to work the busted screen. I wasn't sure if it was even registering my fingertips. "I'll fix you," someone whispered in my ear. I furrowed my eyebrows and looked down at my broken phone. Had the YouTube video started playing again? Maybe I'd somehow pressed play. "Over here," a whisper, softer than before. I peeled my earbuds out and turned my head all around. Was someone talking to me? "Don't be afraid." The sound came from behind me. I whipped around and was faced with a small strand of trees at the end of the apartment complex's lot. About 20 feet behind the dumpster stood one of those sort of micro groves of trees that sometimes manage to sprout up in cities. Maybe 10 dozen trees total, stretched out over 100 yards. There certainly weren't any animals living in there, but it wasn't beyond my imagination that some bum could have set up a tent out there. "I can help." It may have been curiosity. It may have been some rebellious stroke of recklessness striking up in my psyche. Maybe I was just stoned out of my head. But I went in. The ground was muddy with melted snow and ice slush, but I didn't pay any mind to my shoes. Walking through the trees was unusually dark. Sure, the straggly, leaf-bare canopies would block out any moonlight, but having lived in a metropolis my entire life, I had rarely encountered real, deep dark anywhere outdoors. Not with light pollution like ours. I didn't need to see where I was going, though. I sort of felt it. The path was instinctual. Now and then, my hands would collide with a skinny trunk, and I'd pull myself around it, deeper into the trees, feeling with each successive step that I was drawing nearer to whatever it was I was supposed to find. "You're so close," the soft voice whispered. The space between the trees started to grow larger as I neared the source. They grew further apart and left plenty of ground between them for thick, gnarly roots. In the center of it all stood a tree much thicker and more robust than the rest. It was tall, much taller than the young trees that surrounded it. Its dark grey bark had grown bulky. The bark was deeply furrowed and coarse and twisted into quagmires of entangled wrinkles and folds. When the voice called again, I finally spotted its source. Like all voices, it came from, well, a mouth. But this mouth was embedded in a particularly knotted up lump of tree that stuck out from 10 feet up the trunk. Its bark-coated lips moved with its words. It was telling me not to be afraid, that it wanted to treat me well. A pair of black holes sunk down into the bark, its hollow eyes. A sharp nose jutted out between them. The slopes of its cheeks rose and fell, as if there were actual muscle in the wood that was contracting and relaxing as it spoke. I must have been really tired, or that was some damn good weed. I couldn't think of anything to say in response. I just stood there, my mouth agape and my eyes glazed over, dumbfounded by the peaceful human face twisted into the flesh of this tree. And, despite the tree's apparent wishes, I was afraid. Fuck that. Wouldn't you be? You don't notice that your heart is pounding until it really starts pounding. When you can actually fucking hear it drumming there. Until you can feel your pulse throbbing at your temples. I licked my lips, but it didn't do much as my whole mouth had dried up like a creek bed in a drought. By the time I actually thought of something to say, my throat was so parched that I could hardly get it out. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I can fix it," the tree said. I glanced down at my phone, then back at the tree. I was flabbergasted. I asked, "You can fix my phone?" "Give me what is broken," the tree spoke. It had the blank, tranquil face of an angel. The kind you see in illustrations. Somber, non-threatening. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could make out something of a vague body suspended in the bark. Its legs were crossed, its arms spread wide and wrapped backwards around the trunk. I took a step. In response, the figure in the tree unlocked its ankles. Its legs spread, revealing a shallow, shadowed cavity in the trunk of the tree. Hesitantly, I set my Samsung in the wood and stepped back in caution. The figure's thighs pressed together again, and from within the tree I heard a series of muffled scratches. It sounded for a full minute or more. A field of goosebumps shot down my forearms. Tingles spread over my scalp. Unnerved chills wormed their way down my spine and over my shoulders. Just as if I had been watching ASMR videos. My stomach churned at the conclusion that there was something very much sentient standing before my eyes. I was ready to turn and run away, But before I could make a first step, the tree opened once more, and I could see the glint of my phone screen reflecting a shaft of moonlight. I reluctantly reached into the tree's hollow and withdrew my phone. Tapping the power button, its screen came alive with blue light and 0 cracks or scratches to be seen. I narrowed my eyes and stared up into the figure's woodbark face. Its expression had changed with the slightest sign of a smile tugging at the corner of its lips. The being's 2 legs crossed again at the ankles, and I tried to show my gratitude, but got no response. The Mending Tree would not speak again that night. Over the next week, the events of that night replayed in my mind. At work, I found myself staring idly at the wall while twirling a pen. I could only wonder what it all meant. What in the world had actually happened that night? Surely, I must have been dreaming, or I hallucinated the entire event. In the end, I always circled back to the one puzzle piece of evidence I had: my unblemished phone screen. So great was my curiosity that I began to assemble a collection of broken things. Most of them, I realized, she had broken. The little blue and white glass piece that had shattered against the wall just behind my head. The Illmatic record, also thrown, that had busted into 6 separate vinyl shards. The picture frame that had splintered like a budding rose, our smiling faces in Wicker Park. 2 pairs of happy eyes peeking out through the lace of broken glass. I sat on the foot of the bed, running the pads of my thumbs all over these things, expecting some tide of emotions to wash over me that just never came. I unlocked the small safe under my bed. This is where I kept my stash and my grinder and my one-hitter, as well as some text documents, a key to a storage pod, and an old CZ revolver that once belonged to my grandfather. The revolver was broken also. It hadn't been in firing condition in over a decade. I wasn't much of a firearms guy and had no plans of using it, so I didn't bother putting it in the box. I pushed the revolver to the back, grabbed my weed, and packed a bowl. The nightly ritual began. I smoked on the balcony, connected YouTube to the Chromecast, and spent a few hours watching people play Steam games. Even as I distracted myself, my mind kept straying back in time to the night of the tree. Unable to sate my curiosity, I pulled on my jacket and gathered up the 6 broken shards of Illmatic. I lit a cigarette as soon as I hit the parking lot and made a beeline for the dumpster. Almost as if the tree knew my intentions, I began to hear it beckoning me. That soft, ethereal voice pulled at me like an ocean current. Whether it was my inquisitiveness or some actual spectral magnetism, my body could hardly keep up with my hastened feet. "Come to me," the voice lilted. "Give me what is broken." Though I had only been there once, I knew the path by heart. I traipsed through the dark trees like an expert woodsman, aware of every low, cutting branch or jutting root. Before I knew it, I was standing at the base of the Mending Tree, staring up into the 2 empty sockets of its eyes. I used the light of my phone to get a better view of the eerie figure embedded in the tree bark. It had a long, feminine body grotesquely wrapped around the trunk. Its elbow and shoulder joints bent back to an uneasy hyperextension. I shined the light more intensely on the thing's face. Carpenter ants scrambled in and out of its slightly parted lips. Black sap ran down from the corners of its eyes. My heart shrank in my chest. Its beating felt smaller, colder. Fear still slowed my hand as I approached. The 6 shards of my shattered NAS album were held out for the Mending Tree to survey. Without another word, its ankles unhooked and its thighs spread, and that dank cavity in the tree trunk presented itself. Just as before, the tree sealed up, and from inside came the scratching sound masked behind several inches of wood. The crown of my skull was alight with prickling nerves. As if it had been freshly pressed, my copy of Illmatic emerged from the tree pristine. And, just as before, the wooden face of the Mending Tree stretched into a wider grin. The slightly jovial arch curved into its sunken eyes. Again, I thanked the Mending Tree. Again, it had fallen silent. I returned to my apartment, empty as always. She hadn't been home in over a week. Usually I would catch her in passing when she stopped home to pick up fresh clothes. Once an absence of this magnitude would have enraged and depressed me. However, the enigma of the Mending Tree was too enthralling for me to be bothered by shameful jealousy. Sure, it was a bit peculiar for her to be gone for this long, though. I shrugged. The freshly prepared copy of Illmatic began to spin on my record player, and I settled into bed in only my boxers, bobbing my head along with the beat. I thought of sucking at the half-spent ashes left in my piece, but decided that I felt fine enough as it was, and instead lay in the dark, listening to the opening monologue of the Genesis. And you're sitting at home doing this shit? You should be earning a medal for this. Stop fucking around and be a man. There ain't nothing out here for you. I couldn't help but smile. A wave of tranquility washed over me, the likes of which I had not felt in months. Lately, I had been enjoying having the apartment to myself. I flopped on my stomach and stretched myself from one corner of the mattress to the other. So this was being single. I had forgotten over the last 6 years what it felt like. It wasn't so bad after all. Things only improved over the next few days. I would come home from work, strip naked, get high, turn on the TV, and enjoy the freedom of solitude. 10 days had come and gone since she had last come home, and I was getting used to the idea that she never would. I flipped through the channels as I set about packing my ball. I didn't have cable, and at this time of night, there was not much on besides news and late-night talk shows. The news was always the same. A rehashed story about the water in Flint, something, Syrian refugees, and then the local news where some young woman had been found mutilated by the highway. I laughed at the headline graphics. Black market organ harvest? Scare tactics. Ratings grabbers. Flashy, soundbite-fueled fictions. The media had become a joke to my generation. A bloated sex and violence cash grab. Again, I retrieved my box of broken items and headed for the dumpster. I dove into the black trees with a splintered picture frame in my pocket. Over the muddy path I trekked. The blue haze of my frozen breath floated around my head. Once again, I stood at the base of the Mending Tree. Its face had contorted since the last time I visited. It seemed bored. It seemed almost disappointed. Its lips were pursed in a cockeyed slant, and its hollow eyes appeared to sag. Sticky, black globules of sap hung under its eyes. Another rivulet of black ooze ran down in one long line from between its thighs. "Why do you waste my time?" the tree asked in its lulling voice. I wouldn't think of it," I said. I produced the picture frame from my pocket. The full moon above was bright enough that I could just make out our two faces in the photograph. "This has already been fixed," the tree groaned. "What?" I looked down at the frame. The glass was still thoroughly busted. I held it up to the tree. "It's broken, see?" "What was broken," the tree boomed, "has been mended. You waste my time. Bring that which is truly broken." "I don't understand." "Bring it to me." Its voice dropped to a low whisper, a raspy note on the breeze that sent chills trembling through me. "That which is truly," its tone lowered an octave, "broken." I returned home with more questions than ever. My newfound peace had been swept away. I lay in bed, feeling small, feeling outclassed. I didn't want to smoke. Sleep escaped me wholly. Whatever music I put on fell on uninterested ears. The rhythm of music bounced off of me like a trivial noise. At work I was distracted. At home I was uneasy. In the mirror I was pale. At night I lay awake and listened for the telltale click of the tumblers in the deadbolt. Instead of sleeping, I waited for the sound of her footsteps in the foyer. I'm not the type that believes in fate or the magical bonds of love, but some primordial voice in the depths of my psyche was sounding an alarm. She felt farther away than ever. I could hardly recall her face when I tried. The pressure of her absence bore down on me with more weight than ever before. I tried her cell phone, but got no answer. I sent a text and a Snapchat. I sat staring at the wall, ringing out hours upon hours with no response. My throat tightened like some unseen hand were drawing close around it. When the morning sun peeked through my blinds, I had exhausted myself with crying and waiting. I checked my phone one last time. No notifications. Then I slept. I don't know how I decided. The decision wasn't made so much as it announced itself. I awoke that afternoon in a haze, with cold drool smeared across my cheek. If she did not come home tonight, I was going to kill myself. I walked around the apartment in a settled sort of trance. I was unbothered when I burned a grilled cheese. When my modem booted me from the internet temporarily, I didn't even feign frustration. I didn't care. I had come upon a conclusion. A switch in my soul had been flipped, just as casually as flicking out the lights when leaving a room. The decision cast the shadow of its completeness and promise of closure over everything. As midnight approached, I tried to call her cell one last time. Maybe by some miracle she would answer and, unwitting, save my life. But it rang and it rang and it rang through the voicemail. I wish I could say I was disappointed, but I was not. Just reaffirmed. I turned the dial on the safe under my bed and removed my grandfather's revolver. A dull patina had formed on the barrel. It was small, I thought, for a gun. Barely as large as my palm. I had one final trip to make. I didn't bother to put on my jacket. I could stand the cold for a few minutes this would all take. Through the parking lot, past the dumpster into the trees, the air was frozen, yet the lone bullet that I clutched in my fist was as warm as if it had been laying in smouldering coals. The Mending Tree, once terrifying in its mystery, was beautiful that night. Whereas on my last visit, its wooden face showed boredom, that night its creeping smile was fuller than ever. Semi-liquid sap was bubbling up from its eyes. Ants and black beetles and maggots squirmed on its smiling lips. From between the Mending Tree's overlapping thighs came a long streak of black, a dripping stream that had long since dried. It was just a black stain now that stretched all the way down to the roots. "You have finally come," the tree spoke. "I am here to help you." "Thank you," I said. I held the broken revolver up in my outstretched palms. Those slender, twisted legs unfurled and spread before me. The cavernous black of the Mending Tree's insides let out a breath of wood rot. Amongst the smells of decay, however, I detected something else. Iron, flesh, death. As I approached, I saw that the cavity was not vacant. A small wooden box waited inside. I dropped the revolver and took the little chest into my hands. The wood was old and chipped all around its edges. Its lid was on a pair of rusted hinges. "You will never see her again," the tree moaned. I unfastened the simple latch that held the box shut and slowly lifted the lid. Instantly, I was assaulted by the overwhelming odor of blood. Even in the dark of night, I could tell exactly what I was holding. Dark red, nearing black in color, the size of my fist. It was no longer beating. A human heart. Her heart. Torn from her chest, the large tubes once attached to the atrium and ventricles had been lacerated and torn away. When I squinted, I could make out the silvers of black thread sewn in and other of the lump of flesh. Like sutures, dark, dried blood stained the bottom of the box. "What have you done?" I stammered. I dropped the box. Her heart bounced off the cold ground and rolled. "What is this?" For the first time, the figure's head moved. It pulled away from the trunk of the tree, its head craning down with the sound of splintering bark and wet wooden grains peeling apart. Its face was plastered with a terrifying grimace. "Give me that which is truly broken," the tree demanded. I glanced down at the heart, exhumed from her chest. that lay on chilled mud. The Mending Tree's arms unfurled from around the trunk. Splinters of bark sprayed in every direction as this gnarled oaken seraphim pulled itself free of its decades-old prison. The tree creaked and moaned, like splitting sinews ripped free of bone. The figure's head tilted 90 degrees. Insects, black as night, poured from its gaping maw. Tears of sap dripped onto the tree's roots. Its hands, made of long tendrils like sapling switches, fanned out. Its branches, its fingers loomed over me. The black cavity in the trunk once again gaped at me from between outspread legs. "Bring me your heart," the creature howled. "Bring me that which is truly broken." I turned and ran. No longer did the path through the dark woods come naturally to me. No, I stumbled over upturned roots and my shoes had no traction on slick mud. I fell on my face and clawed my way forward on all fours. All around me, tree trunks were straining to bend towards the earth. Their scraggly branches grasped at the air just above my head. Their tips cut my cheeks, their roots looped like lethargic pythons around my ankles, and I was barely able to slip free before I was snared. "Let me help you," the nightmare voice echoed in the night. I scrambled back onto unsure feet and beat a path toward the parking lot lights. Something sharp caught my forearm, cut a bloody line from wrist to elbow. It twisted my whole body around, and just before I could escape to the safety of black pavement, a crooked root kinched like a noose around my left foot. I slammed into the ground, my face beat into the mud, and I could feel a broken tooth rattling around in my mouth. I turned and sat on my ass. There, staring down at me, was the wretched face of the Mending Tree. Inches from my nose, wooden lips sprayed a spittle of putrid sap across my shore. Its body was a mass of whipping sprigs and boughs curling upon themselves like serpents. It was one of the Mending Tree's frenzied arms that had managed to entangle me. "Give me your heart." I grabbed fistfuls of my jeans and yanked at my leg. The crushing root had constricted so tight that my joint cracked. I grit my teeth and fought to pull free, like a rabbit in a snare. A sickening crack sounded from my knee, and pain burned its way up to my hip. But I was free, wounded and delirious. I hobbled over the parking lot as fast as my lifeless leg would allow. I was frantic, wide-eyed, absolutely mad with life. Sometimes, on warm nights when my car windows are down, and I cruise through the parking lot towards home, a distant sound sets my scalp aflame with that cordless chill, those waves of tingling dread